Hey everyone, and welcome to this Truth and Reconciliation Week session, Resistance, Governance, and the Powley Decision. My name is Jeff Junk, and I'll be helping facilitate our session today. I'm a volunteer with RBC, and I work on the bank's community marketing and citizenship team. I'm joining from Toronto today, and for that reason, I want to acknowledge that the land on which that I live, work, and gather with others is the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and Anishinaabe, including the Chippewas and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. As you can imagine, Toronto is a very diverse and multicultural city. It's also host to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, and it's within the territory of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum. And because we're meeting virtually, I also just want to acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all Inuit, Métis, and First Nations peoples across the country. As I mentioned, this session is Resistance, Governance, and the Powley Decision. And if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A, and we'll try to get them as many as we can later on. I want to give a really warm welcome to our speaker today, Mitch Case. Mitch is a proud Métis citizen from historic Sault Ste. Marie Métis community and a community-based historian focusing on the history of Ontario Métis communities, especially those around the Great Lakes. And now, Mitch, I think my job is done, so I'll turn things over to you now to share a bit more about yourself and get into the great presentation ahead of us.
Well, thank you, Jeff, and I just want to make sure you can hear me, Jeff.
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, on fantastic. So I just want to begin and say I want to thank the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation and my government, the Métis Nation of Ontario, for asking me to be part of the session today. And I want to commend the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation for all of the incredible work that they've been doing this week and throughout the frankly the years past. And that work does not go unnoticed or unappreciated, and I just want to offer that to them. My name, as was said, is Mitch Case. I'm the regional councillor for Region 4 on the Provisional Council of the Métis Nation of Ontario. I represent the Huron-Superior Regional Métis community, the communities at the very core, at the very heart of the Great Lakes, and that's where I come from. That's where my ancestry is from. Primarily, my family's connected all over the Upper Great Lakes and into Manitoba and sort of all over that part of the Métis homeland. But I'm also the descendant of a residential school survivor. One of my grandmothers attended the Shingwak Indian Residential School, and I just want to acknowledge her and acknowledge particularly the Children of Shingwak Alumni Association, the survivors organization from that school. And I, through my previous work life, I had an opportunity to work with the survivors almost on a daily basis. And I was always just so inspired by them and the work that they do and the way that they have created a future for all of us through their hard work and determination. And I just really wanted to give that shout out to the Children of Shingwak. I'm actually coming to you today from the airport in Saskatoon, where I'm on my way home from a special sitting of the Métis Nation General Assembly, where we held an election yesterday. We elected a new president for the first time in almost 20 years. We elected the first woman president of the Métis National Council and the youngest leader of the Métis Nation since Louis Riel. And I think that is an incredible thing for us to have accomplished on September 30th, on the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And I think it's an incredible step forward for our people. And so it's great, but it's interesting that I'm coming to you today to talk to you from the airport as I'm on my way back home to my community. That is actually what I'm here to talk about. As I said, I'm from that community at Sault Ste. Marie, and I just want to talk a little bit about the origins of that community, because it is in that origin story that we, as a community, as a people, have always found our strength, our determination, our courage, and our commitment to continuing to pursue the things that mattered to our ancestors and continue to matter to our community today. And that community that I call home, that community that I am fortunate enough to have been elected to represent, there is an incredible passion and determination and an incredible story of a resistance that has gone unnoticed in many ways and gone almost forgotten in some ways in other parts of the country and in other conversations. And I always like to take an opportunity to talk about the work that has gone on in my community for a couple hundred years, and the way that we, generation after generation of leadership and elders and young people in our community, have kept the story alive, kept alive the story of our community, and ensured that I stand here today as a relatively young leader. When I was elected to this position, I was still considered anyway a youth, and I just had a birthday that makes that no longer the case. But but that I can stand here as a relatively young man and be able to with total confidence tell you the story of my community, because the elders kept it alive and made sure that I knew and took time to teach me. And so I'm really happy to have this opportunity today to talk just a little bit about that history, a little bit about that community. We, our community, like many Métis communities, like all Métis communities, emerged sort of in the dying days of the 1700s and into the early 1800s, and emerged out of a very particular set of circumstances, a very particular time in the history of this part of the world. And by this part of the world, I mean sort of north central North America and the from the upper Great Lakes and westward. And we live in a world that is interconnected, and we are shaped by the events and things around us. And there was a particular time that that our communities emerged and formed a particular identity, a particular way of life, and a particular sort of a worldview that has guided us ever since. And so, for us, and particularly today, and particularly thinking about the topic that we sort of worked out to talk about, sort of resistance, governance, Powley, and sort of on into the future, it's important to recognize some of the events that led up to the Powley case. And it often, I'll say, for anyone who may or may not know about the Powley case, it was the first recognition of the existence of Section 35 Métis rights in the Canadian Constitution. The first breaking of that sort of legal wall that had been put up to try to keep our people from fully being able to protect and enjoy and be beneficiaries of those rights that our ancestors had fought for so long. And that decision from the Supreme Court of Canada in October or September 19th of 2003, that decision changed the world for Métis people, for the Métis Nation, in ways that we are still today understanding. But often that story seems to be told. If you look up that story, if you Google, the Powley case, you'll get a really good summary of the legal story and the story of the courts, and the fact that two members of my community, cousins of mine, were charged for hunting a moose without a license. They were charged. They decided they were going to fight it, and the Métis Nation of Ontario and the Métis National Council got behind them. They went to court. Then the government appealed. They went to court again, and they went to court again, and then finally ended up at the Supreme Court, where at the end of it, the Supreme Court had agreed with all of the arguments that we had put forward. That's a great story. It's a beautiful story, but it's not the whole story, and it is frankly a story that focuses a little bit too much on the legal system than I would like. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we actually got there, and that Powley wasn't an accident. It was actually part of a long, multiple generations long struggle for rights. In in the 1800s, there are multiple instances where my community and I'm pretty lucky to have elders and relatives in my family who not only know the history of our community, but also know the history of our family and the role that our family has played in that community. And at many of these events, if not all of these events, we can directly trace our family and our relatives to these events throughout our history. In 1812, we had to take a stand to defend ourselves, to defend our community when war broke out between the British and the Americans. And we were, again, as I said earlier, we are caught, we are influenced by the events around us, and we were caught in the middle of a war that was not our doing, and it was not about any of our interests, but we had to defend ourselves. And our community paid dearly for that. The Americans, when they reached Sault Ste. Marie, they burned our entire village to the ground because of our alignment with the British Crown, because we saw it as our best interest to align with them over the Americans. That moment of resistance, there's still stories that are told in our community about when that happened, and the consequence we paid for that, but knowing that we had to do what we had to do to defend ourselves. A few years after that, when one of the most important moments in the history of the Métis Nation occurred at Seven Oaks. There's stories and written documentation about our community loading up our canoes, loading up a couple of canoes and heading westward from Sault Ste. Marie, heading to Red River to support our relatives in Manitoba. And that interconnection of the political consciousness from the communities in the Great Lakes to the communities in the Red River area was very strong at that time. And it's not quite as well known and not quite as strong today, but we're working to re-understand that history of our communities. Throughout the 1830s and 40s, the British government, the British Crown, attempted on multiple occasions to relocate our community, to remove us from our river lots in Sault Ste. Marie, to remove us from our lands, and to force us to relocate to Manitoulin Island. For anyone who knows where that is, it's a beautiful place. It is a truly beautiful place, but it is not where we wanted to live. We wanted to live on our land, on our river lots, at the place that we had sort of emerged from as a community. And we resisted and resisted and resisted, and we would not move, and we would not allow them to move us. In the late 1840s, two events happened that really sent shockwaves. There was in Manitoba, the Sayers trial took place, where one of our community members was put on trial for disobeying and disregarding the Hudson's Bay Company's monopoly that they had, that gave them exclusive use, exclusive trade rates in that part of the world. And they Guillaume Sayre went on trial. He was supported by Louis Riel Sr., and they, through the collective strength of that community, broke the Hudson's Bay monopoly. Within that same year, his brother, Guillaume Sayre's brother, was back here in my community, where they were from, and was helping to organize what would become known as the Mica Bay incident, where many members of our community and many leadership from the neighboring First Nations with whom we share a lot of history, and we share territory, and we share a lot of political interests at that time, got together and we went to, and then this is the way history gets told. The Hudson's Bay Company will tell you, if you look into their records, that we stole a cannon from them. We did not steal a cannon, we borrowed a cannon. We always intended to bring it back. We actually didn't, and some of our elders know stories and have stories about where, if we were to get a dive team, we would be able to go and find the cannon out in Lake Superior. But as of now, we don't know where that cannon is. But maybe someday it will resurface. But we borrowed a cannon and we went to the mine at Mica Bay, where the Montreal Mining Company and the Quebec Mining Company were extracting resources from our territory without our permission, without our consent, and directly violating their own law, violating the law that had been laid out in the Royal Proclamation of 1763. And we shut that mine down. And the connections between our community and the Red River at that time were strong and clear. And the Hudson's Bay Company requested Canada to send troops to Sault Ste. Marie in preparation for what they were understanding and hearing from their, their incredibly strong intelligence network of the Hudson's Bay Company, that 2,000 Red River Métis were on their way to Sault Ste. Marie to support our community in our fight against this extraction efforts. What ended up happening, though, as a result of that, the British government sent a treaty commissioner to Sault Ste. Marie and negotiated a treaty with the First Nations. And his response to us was that to the Métis leadership and to several ancestors of mine, was that he had no mandate to deal with us. He only had a mandate to deal with the First Nations, and he did not have a mandate to deal with the Métis. But he made certain promises to us. He promised that the land on which we were then residing at our river lots would be protected, that land would be ours. And that if we wrote to the government with our other concerns, that he had little doubt that they would take us seriously. We did that. We took him at his word, and we believed that promise meant something. And we then followed up, and we wrote a letter and wrote a petition. And the First Nations wrote a separate petition that supported our petition. And on October the 21st, 1850, the British government officially received that petition, and they have yet to respond to us. 171 years has gone by, and they have yet to live up to the promise that their representative made to us that day. And if anyone thinks that we are going to forget, or if anyone thinks that I'm going to forget, or that I'm going to not be like a dog with a bone on this issue, they are fooling themselves. And reconciliation with Canada requires, and with Canadians, between our community and Canadians and Ontarians, requires that outstanding promise be dealt with and be respected. What ended up happening, though, after 1850, when our river lots were taken away from us and our community was dispersed from that place at Sault Ste. Marie, we ended up living. There's a few places where our elders and our records still talk about where we lived in just little, what would basically be shanty towns, where we were surviving. Some of our relatives were invited to live on reserve with some of our First Nations neighbors, at the invitation of their great leader, Chief Shingwag, who advocated on our behalf on many times. But by about 1905, many members of our community, led sort of by an old, really wonderful old man named, well, he wasn't old then, but he certainly would live to be very old, Dave Busno, who established a little village at one of our old fishing villages, and within a few years became a beautiful, thriving little village where many of our families moved there to get away from the racism and the discrimination and the poverty that came with the loss of our land. And that village existed until 1968, when the Ontario government extended the boundaries of Lake Superior Provincial Park, and they evicted our families from that land and burned our village to the ground. And there are still elders. There's elders that I work with all the time, Dolores Pinder, Bud Busno, and others, who remember that village, and they have photos from that village, and they have stories from that village, and they remember when their parents and their relatives and their friends had all of their homes burned down to make way for the provincial park. And that moment really that's not a very long time ago, 1968. That moment that really continues to affect our community and continues to affect our families. But it's also in the 1960s and 70s that our political consciousness is sort of reawakened, and we begin to organize, and we begin to reorganize ourselves through a couple of different organizations through the 1970s and 80s, and we got together with other communities. We got together with other communities in Ontario, and we worked with other communities in Western Canada to tell our stories and to begin to organize. And by 1982, of course, all Indigenous people in this country secured an incredible victory when we were included in Section 35 of the Constitution, which doesn't mean much to us in our legal systems, but to have a mechanism for us to hold Canada accountable to its own promises is incredibly has been incredibly helpful to us, and I think we owe it to our leaders from that time, from the 70s and 80s, who really fought incredibly hard to make Canada put that promise into the Constitution. But from that point forward, we knew that we now had a new tool in our toolkit, and that we had something that we could hang our hat on to be able to go to the courts if we needed to. And starting in 1989, there is an elder back home, someone who has been a teacher of mine for since I was a little kid, Art Bennett, who he's served many different roles in our community over the years. But at the time, he was president of the Métis local just outside of Sault Ste. Marie, and he organized, him and many other harvesters organized themselves. They were all moose hunters from way back. Their families were living in our community from the formation of our community, and they organized themselves. They wrote down rules of how they were going to harvest, what rules they would follow, how they would protect conservation concerns, and all of those things that really mattered to us. And Art was sent in as the representative of this group of Métis rights holders who went to meet with the Ministry of Natural Resources and tried to negotiate a deal with them to talk about recognition of our rights and accounting for the fact that there were Métis harvesters harvesting in the area, and that in their moose count that the ministry does, they may want to consider that there are people harvesting without licenses. And I won't say exactly what was said that day by the government's representative, but we haven't forgot what he said, and it was not very kind. And he said some very, very hurtful things to our leadership at that time. And Art responded saying that, well, I have a feeling that some people in higher places than you and I are going to make the final call on this one. And he walked out of there. The following year, in 1992, Art went out, shot a moose without a license, and brought the hide into the MNR and tried to get them to charge him because he wanted to go to court to be able to prove that we have a right as Métis to harvest from our traditional territory. But the trouble with Art was that he was pretty high profile. He was the deputy mayor of the town that he lived in, and he was chair of the social services board, and he was a local business owner. And I think we kind of suspect that the ministry knew he was trying to pick a fight, and so they didn't charge him. They just sort of let it go. And so we had to rethink the strategy again. Okay, so trying to negotiate with them didn't work. Trying to get them to charge us didn't work. Well, I guess we'll just have to go hunting and pretend like we're hiding like we used to have to do. And then maybe one of them will catch us and we'll get charged, and then we can go to court. And that plan worked spectacularly. And in the fall of 1993, two of our harvesters, Steve and Roddy Powley from Sault Ste. Marie, were charged with hunting without a license. They said, we're not going to plead guilty the way we used to. We are going to stand up. We're going to stand up for ourselves. We're going to stand up for our community. And we are going to stand up for our community. We are going to push back, and we're going to, in the way that we always have, in the way that this community always has, we will stand up for ourselves. And at that point, the Métis Nation of Ontario was just forming. We had to leave the organization that we had previously been part of because it was no longer serving our needs. And our communities in Ontario had formed the Métis Nation of Ontario as a political representative. The Métis National Council came on board and completely supported that the case as we moved our way through the courts. And on September the 19th, 2003, which happens to be my birthday, I remember sitting around at my mother's house having birthday cake on my 13th birthday, and watching on TV as the acting president of the Métis National Council at that time, Audrey Putra, the president of Métis Nation of Alberta, stood at the National Press Gallery in Ottawa, and she said, "To all the Métis people out there, I want to say 2 words: we won." And she was talking about Steve and Roddy, and she was talking about their court case. And from that point forward, the world has shifted. Our communities in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta have been able to use the Powley case to advance their rights. And we've been able to get Canada to come to the table. And we've been able to finally have people recognize that we are a community with a story. We are a people with a history, and we deserve respect, and we deserve to have our rights, concerns, and interests understood and addressed. And that is one of the key victories that Powley really secured for us. And what I hope that I've highlighted today in this little talk that I've done is to talk about how Powley wasn't an accident. It wasn't just something that we stumbled into, and these 2 guys got charged, and they didn't they were too stubborn to just plead guilty. It was part of a strategy. It was part of a plan. It was part of a history. When I talked about that instance where we borrowed the cannon and went to Mica Bay, Steve and Roddy, Steve and his son Roddy, their ancestors were there at Mica Bay. One of their ancestors was arrested for his actions at Mica Bay. That led to that treaty promise to us that we are still treaty commissioners promise that we are still working today to have resolved. And so, we are a proud community, and I'm proud to be part of this community. I'm proud to represent this community, and I'm extremely thankful to the elders who helped teach me so that I knew this story well enough to be able to share it with you today. So I think I'm going to turn it back over to Jeff. If there's maybe there's some questions from the chat, and go from there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mitch, for sharing that. To be honest, I have never heard of the Powley decision, so this was really educational for me, and it's actually quite shocking to hear that it was really only 17 years ago that decision was made. So I encourage people, use the Q&A function to submit your questions, and while we wait for that to come in, I do wonder for you, Mitch, coming off such a momentous and historic weekend for you and your community, and thinking about some of the journey you just spoke about, what does the future look like? How is it influenced by the Powley decision? Because I'm assuming these are ongoing things that are happening in real time. So when you have the election of a new leader, these things must be a bit intertwined.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely, Jeff. And one of the things, just to the fact that you say you hadn't heard of the Powley case, I think that it really is. That's why these weeks matter. That's why the work of the National Center really does matter, because it is. It's so important that we, one of my elders used to say, after he was a First Nations elder that I worked with, he said, after 500 years, we still don't know anything about each other, right? And we need to, as Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples, we need to really come to understand each other in our history. And, one of the things that in the Supreme Court, in the court system leading up to the decision in Powley, the most troubling thing was that Canada and Ontario's argument was that Steve and Roddy Powley didn't have Métis rights because Métis people don't exist. That was their argument. And when they lost that argument, they said, well, if you did exist, you don't exist anymore. And then when they lost that argument, they said, well, if you did exist and you do exist, you surely don't have any rights because the treaty in 1850 extinguished those rights. And the Supreme Court essentially responded, how could the treaty have extinguished their rights if the treaty commissioner said he didn't have a mandate to deal with them? You can't have said that you don't have a mandate, but at the same time, that mandate included extinguishing their rights. And so, but I think it's really important that, 18 years ago, Canada was still saying that our people did not exist. And that for me is what Powley did, right? And so, but we continue, and when you ask the question about what's the path forward and what does the future look like, that's the continued challenge we have, is that that thinking didn't just go away. That understanding didn't just go away because we won a decision in September of 2003. We've had to continually push that, and I think the future, the future, I actually, it sounds cliche. I think the future is incredibly bright for our community. There's incredible work. I won't go into it today, just in the interest of time. There's incredible work that my communities back home in Sault Ste. Marie and the North Channel are leading, and there are communities across the country and the Métis National Council with some new energy there. The future is very, very bright, I think, for our communities. Yeah.
One of the questions we just got, and Linda DeLuca says her class has been introduced to the Powley decision last week, so they're way ahead of me. So good to know that the next generation is doing better than I am. Her class was wondering if you can give your connection. You said they were your cousins, the two defendants, or looking for you to expand a little bit more on your relationship with them.
Oh, sure. Yes. So they, if anyone knows anything about Métis communities, we are, we are a people, we are a community, and we are interrelated, and we are all interconnected. And so there are, if you look at the history of our community in Sault Ste. Marie, all of our families share connections to all of those points in history, and so Steve Powley and I, we have I'm trying to think, we have Steve's also, he's like my grandpa's generation, so there's a generation gap. I'm the same generation as Steve's grandchildren, but we have a shared grandmother. The interconnection between the Lesage family and our family, the Corbier and the Busnos and the Nolans and the Boyers, and it's Métis genealogy is that's a really great question, but that's a much bigger topic than I have time for today.
Well, lots of interconnectivity though, which is, I think, always good to hear with different generations. One of the questions I also had as we was waiting for some more questions to come in, I think what I was really struck by what you were sharing about the Powley case is the need to be not only adaptable to your approach in getting the legal recognition that you wanted, but also I think there's some interesting stubbornness in that, and some civil disobedience that I think is really interesting and maybe worthwhile to unpack, because if you weren't going to get it one way, you're going to get it another way, no matter what the cost was. So I wonder if you can maybe explain a little bit of that approach and why it's so important.
Well, Jeff, I think you just helped me pick the name of the book I want to write about the history of our community: Stubbornness and Civil Disobedience. I think that is actually those are key features of our strategy long term. It is really, it is, if you know who you are and you know where you come from, then everything from that can flow, and the tactics that we have to use can change. We're going to go and try and get M&R to negotiate with us, then I guess we'll just have to we'll have to go and try and pick a fight. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, we'll have to. Those are all different tactics, right? But the overall message is that there was a determination there, right? There was a commitment there. There was a will. I really think that that's important. I think for us as our community, I think for Métis people in general, for Indigenous people more broadly, I think the will and the determination to continue to be proud of who we are, despite everything that we have been through, despite everything that has happened to us. I think that is that's where I draw my strength from, and that's where I draw my determination from, for sure.
Well, I'd love to know too, you were mentioning when the decision came down, it was your 13th birthday. So, seeing that will come to fruition, and then seeing, the leader of your community be on national television and say, we've won. What was that feeling like?
Oh, I remember it. I remember just looking at my grandpa, and my grandpa goes, "Well, I guess things are different now." Like my he was he just sort of said it real simple, right? But I actually and there's much more to this story, Jeff, and someday I'm gonna have the time to sit down and write it. But that was in 2003. In 2004, the province of Ontario signed a harvesting agreement with our government, with Métis Nation of Ontario. And within weeks of signing that agreement, Ontario broke the agreement and started charging us again. And I remember it was in the fall of 2004, our president, Métis Nation of Ontario at the time, Tony Belcourt, came to our community, and we were at, anybody who knows Sault Ste. Marie, we were at the Water Tower in a conference room there, where they were talking about how Ontario had once again breached the agreement that they reached with us, and that Tony and there's a whole history too, Jeff, of like Métis people who make speeches, and our speech making ability is I think unmatched and unsurpassed in the world. I think some of the best speeches I've ever heard are from even people I don't even agree with, but the way they deliver the messages is inspiring. And I remember being a 15-year-old kid sitting there where Tony Belcourt said, they told us we didn't exist. They told us we didn't have rights, and we went to court. We proved them wrong. We knew we were right. And if we have to go back, we'll do it again. And we did. We went back to court again. And in 2007, Ontario finally stopped fighting us and decided to sit down and work with us. And, that to me, I think we have to tell that story, that, it's the determination of our leadership, it's the determination of our elders that just said, no, we are not going to give in. But then, acknowledging those leaders on the other side who finally decided to sit down and talk to us and to have a respectful, non-adversarial relationship where we can actually try to resolve some of these issues that continue to exist in this country that we all share.
For people who are joining us today on the call, on the video, who are those Métis speakers or orators are the people they should really check out and try to find on YouTube or wherever to really listen to?
Oh, absolutely. I think and I don't know how all this technology works, but maybe I know I provided some links to some resources that could be shared afterwards. But maybe I could send some links we could add to that list that'll be posted, because but there is a speech that I probably watch the video 10 times a year, the speech from Jim Sinclair, who was the president of the Métis Society in Saskatchewan in the 1980s. A speech he made to the Prime Minister and all of the premiers in 1987. It's on YouTube. There's a speech from him. It's his closing remarks at the final constitutional conference, where the premiers had walked away from an agreement on Indigenous self-government. And that speech is one I've heard. Many of these speeches, frankly, are ones that I've just been in the room for, the ones that mean the most to me because I've sat there. But there are some incredible. There was a talk given a week or so ago, and that link can be found on YouTube of two of our elders and former political leaders, but current cultural leaders, Tony Belcourt and Maria Campbell, where they share some. There's many others I can think of. Maybe I can put together a little bit of a list and send it over, and it can get posted wherever.
Yeah, I'm sure that I think that'd be so helpful for people to know, who those people are, who we should be listening to or engaging with. The one last question that has come in that I thought might be good for people to know is just a bit of more background on the size of the Métis community, and what does it look like across Canada? I know there's a Métis Nation of Ontario. You've spoken about the Métis peoples in Alberta and Saskatchewan. But you can share a little bit about what that looks like across the country.
Sure, and I think that that's a really good topic to end on, because there is unfortunately a whole lot of um, misconceptions and disinformation out there, and this idea that anyone of mixed ancestry is Métis is simply not historically correct, not in any way, shape, or form respectful of our unique history as peoples, and we reject that idea. And that when I talk about when I talked at the beginning about the early formation of our communities in that specific place in the Upper Great Lakes and in Western Canada, in that specific time, in that specific economic and political context that led to the creation of our communities and the emergence of our communities, and there is those communities, those historic communities exist from sort of the Upper Great Lakes in Ontario and west into of course Manitoba, the Red River settlement, and then west into Saskatchewan, Alberta, parts of British Columbia and the northern United States, and those communities all share an interconnectedness and a history, and but we can't allow ourselves to think that history is monolithic. The idea that the exact experience of my community through St. Marie is exactly the same as the experience at Batoche or in St. Paul, Alberta, or any of those other places is not historically accurate, and it is incredibly naive to think that there is a monolithic, one single way to be and exist. But that being said, there is clearly places where this story did not happen. And there are, in the way that I talk about it is, in the story of the Métis Nation, there are multiple chapters. There's the chapters about my community in the Upper Great Lakes, and there's the chapter of and that's not broken down by time, but by geography in many ways. But there are just simply places where this didn't happen, where this emergence of a new people did not happen, and we continue to today figure out the relationship that we all have with each other, figure out the political relationships that our communities have with each other, and the way that works, because we've been equally affected by colonization the way other Indigenous peoples have, and the imposition of colonial boundaries across our territories, and the imposition of definitions by others and misconceptions by others, and those are some of the things that we continue to deal with today. But yeah, there's some. I suspect that in the coming little while there will be new some great information available from my government, Métis Nation of Ontario. Our new, as I said earlier, the Métis Nation took an incredible step forward yesterday in electing a new national president, and there's going to be some whole new energy in the Métis Nation going forward, and I'm very excited about that.
Well, I'm excited to learn more about that. And as always, with any of these topics, there's lots of learning and unlearning to do. Mitch, thank you so much for sharing this knowledge with us today. I really appreciate it. I'm sure people on the line did as well. But I think we'll wrap it up there. I hope everyone enjoyed our session today, and have a great rest of your day.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jeff. Thank you to the National Center for Reconciliation and all the work that they're doing. Thank you.